I handed out 2 cards. Did anybody not get the 2 cards? Everybody? Last week I handed out the top 10 topics for men's Bible study. Was anybody not here last week? Anybody else? All right, let me just tell you what my thoughts are about where we're headed. A couple weeks ago, you all voted on topics, and that was the top 10 topics. Decision making the will of God was by far number 1, and I told you that I wanted to deal briefly with some of those other topics. We could spend a long time on each one of them. I just want to touch on some of them briefly before we get into decision making. So here's what I'm thinking now. I think we'll start decision making in January, kind of get off to start the year with decision making. And then between now, or for the rest of the year, I'm going to touch on at least those next 3 to 6 topics, just to touch on them briefly so that we at least touch them without, going into a long study. And I want to start with prophecy today. As I told you last week, if we got into the book of Revelation, we'd be in it probably 2 years at least. So that would be fun. I'd like to do that, but also kind of want to get more, broader in different topics. But someday maybe we'll zero in on a book like Revelation or Gospel of John. And if we do, we'll be in them a long time. So any comments or suggestions about my thoughts? Okay, today I want us to start by turning to Mark chapter 13. Mark chapter 13. Verse 35. Mark 13, verse 35. Watch therefore, for you do not know when the master of the house is coming, in the evening, at midnight, at the crowing of the rooster, or in the morning, lest, coming suddenly, he find you sleeping. And what I say to you, I say to all. What's the word?
Watch.
Everybody have watch?
Watch.
Okay. What's he referring to about, who's the master of the house that's coming? What's he referring to there? Yeah, the return of Christ. And for us, what specifically about the return of Christ are we looking for?
Rapture.
The rapture. Yeah. And we don't know what time it's going to be, but we're supposed to watch. And I'm emphasizing the word watch. Notice in verse 36 he says, lest coming suddenly he find you sleeping. So there's 2 words there, sleeping and watch.
Suddenly.
What would be, if you're not sleeping, what are you?
Awake.
You're awake. I want to distinguish awake and watch. I think there's a subtle difference there. What would it mean that you're sleeping when he comes?
Not going to
Yeah, not in fellowship. You're not doing good spiritually.
He's apathetic about it.
You're asleep spiritually. Can Christians, born-again Christians, be asleep? Of course. They still have everlasting life, but they're asleep in their walk with God. What would be the difference between being awake and watching?
You can be on guard duty, watching, or you can be on leave.
Okay. What?
Well, you could be in fellowship but not be watching, possibly.
Watching. What's watching?
Looking for signs.
Yeah, looking for Jesus, looking for signs, looking for what's going on to alert us and stay awake. It'll help us to stay awake if we're watching, is what I'm saying. Looking, what is happening that tells us that the time is approaching? Watching. I think there's a difference between, because could a person be watching but be asleep?
Yes.
In what way?
I mean, they're out of fellowship, but they still know that some of the events that are happening are biblical.
Yeah, very good. That they see prophecy being fulfilled and God's setting the stage, but they're not doing good spiritually. And maybe you've been there. But there are Christians that are there. They know what the Scriptures say about the return of Christ. And they know that God's doing some significant things, but they're not doing good spiritually. So you could watch and be asleep. Could you be awake and not watching?
Absolutely.
In what way?
Well, when I wake up in the morning, I'm sort of sleepy-headed. And I don't really want to think about anything until I get my mind in gear after I've had 3 cups of coffee. So I sit there and my mind just wanders. Where if I'm awake and watching, I have specific details in my mind that I'm looking at, like planning out my day or reading my Bible.
Okay. Okay. So is it possible for a Christian to be in fellowship with God but not watching for Christ's return?
Absolutely.
Yes. Yes. However, and this is what I want to think about, what relationship is there to staying awake and watching? I've distinguished the two. How can watching help you stay awake?
Because you know it's coming, so you want to be in fellowship.
Yeah, that's it. It's a motivation. Watching is a motivation to stay awake. If I'm watching and looking and say, he could come soon, that's a motivation to say, I want to grow in my relationship with him. I want to stay close to him. So I think they're distinct, but they're very closely related, is what I'm trying to say.
But doesn't watching have an element of knowing what to watch for?
Yes.
You have to know some facts.
Yes. And we're going to see that in another passage. You're on a very good track there. Mike.
Does the word watch in this context have anything to do with a military aspect? Like being on watch for the enemy or being on watch for the king to come?
Yeah, that's the idea. Yep. In fact, Jesus uses us watching for the thief. You know, thief could come. I need to be watching. In fact, let's turn over to 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. Alright. 1 Thessalonians 5, starting verse 1. Now, at the end of chapter 4, he just talked about the rapture. So if we were in the flow here, we'd have a better feel, but I'm just telling you. Chapter 4, he talks about the rapture. Chapter 5. But concerning the times and seasons, brethren, you have no need that I should write to you. For you yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord so comes as a thief in the night. For when they say peace and safety, then sudden destruction comes upon them as labor pains upon a pregnant woman, and they shall not escape. Look at this. But you, brethren, are not in darkness, so that this day should overtake you as a thief. You are all sons of light and sons of the day. We are not of the night nor of the darkness. Therefore, let us not, what?
Sleep.
As others do, but let us what?
Watch.
What?
Let's
Watch.
sober.
And be sober. So, there you see sleep and watch again. They're in the same flow. The world is asleep and the world's not watching. When it comes to the return of Christ, the world's asleep and the world's not watching. What do I mean by, I'm pulling on my term. When I say the world's asleep, but when I say the world's not watching, what's the obvious thing there?
We're thinking about the return of Christ.
Yeah, the world's not looking for Christ's return. They're not even thinking about it. And when I say the world's asleep, what do I mean?
They have no relationship.
Yeah, asleep spiritually. They're not walking with God. But Paul says that we shouldn't sleep and we should watch. So again, there's the connection between your spiritual life is directly related to your how you watch. Now you can do okay spiritually if you're not watching, but you'll do better if you're watching. That's what I'm trying to say. There's a distinction, and they're related. Right.
One time, it was a number of years back, a new guy came into town, and a new preacher, and so I invited him to lunch just to kind of see where he was, and I asked him, I said, hey, what do you guys do in terms of end-time events? He says, we don't talk about them. I said, well, why not? Because it seems like people have interest. He says, well, if someone were to ask, I say, a lot of good people think this, and a lot of good people think this, and we kind of sort of land in the middle, but it's not a topic we talk about. So that lends to believers who haven't been taught and are unaware of what we're talking about this morning.
And that's sad.
Yeah.
Because of what I'm trying to say here. That affects people's spiritual life.
Mm-hmm.
Your life is impacted by how much you watch. Okay? Watching is important. We've seen it in two passages. To be on the alert and watch for what's going on so that you're not caught. You know, it says here that when he comes, the world's going to be caught off guard, but you should not be caught off guard. You should be ready and know that the time is approaching. So that's kind of a background of why this is important, what we're going to look at today.
So we as believers should be watching for the return of Christ in the clouds to take us up and rapture.
Yeah.
Okay, and Jesus said that the kingdom of heaven is like a wedding, waiting for the groom to come back for his bride.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
How does that relate to this coming as a thief? I mean, he's coming as a groom to take his bride, but that doesn't sound like a thief to me.
Well, there's different images. On the one hand, he's coming as a bridegroom. On the other hand, he's coming as a thief. There are different metaphors to get us to think about it in different directions.
Relative to the rapture?
Yeah.
Or is it, I mean, on this First Thessalonians 5 here, then it goes into the destruction, the wrath that's coming
Yeah,
in verse 3. That's not for us.
right.
So the world is going to see it for you. On the second coming,
Well, the world doesn't know it's coming yet. That's
they will when he see him stand on the Mount of Olives.
Well, at the second coming, he won't come as at the end of the tribulation, he's not coming as a
That's what
thief.
that's what I want to reconcile.
He's not hoping.
Yeah.
I'm just talking about the rapture, the previous.
The rapture is going to catch people off guard, but not the second coming. In fact, the world's going to know exactly when he's coming at the second coming, because they're going to gather an army to fight against him
Oh,
when
yeah,
he
they're going to
comes.
see him coming before he gets it.
Right. Now, the reason this is important is because the scriptures teach that in the last days there will be prophecies that alert us that he's getting closer. And that's what your card is. The little card that I handed out, there's at the top it says prophecies that must be fulfilled before the rapture. And then at the bottom, a prophecy that must be fulfilled on the day of the rapture. So, even though Jesus said you don't know when he's coming, the scriptures did reveal that before the rapture there had to be some prophecies fulfilled. The rapture could not have occurred, or cannot occur, until these three prophecies are fulfilled. So, what does that say to the generation before the rapture that sees these prophecies fulfilled?
Soon.
If we live to see these prophecies fulfilled, what would that say to us? Yeah, you better be ready. You better be ready, because the generation that's alive at the rapture should not be caught off guard, because they will have seen prophecies that said, man, we're just about there. Okay? And before we look at those, though, I want to look at the timeline on the other side, because some of you, this may be new information to you, so I want to give us a big picture. But I want to start from the right-hand side and go to the left. I want to go backwards. That's a timeline, and what's the last item on the timeline?
Kingdom.
Kingdom. Jesus, and what's right before kingdom? Return. So Jesus is coming again. He's returning to the earth to reign as king, establish his kingdom on the earth. Okay, what's going to happen before the return of Christ? Tribulation. How long?
7 years.
7 years. What's going to happen right before the tribulation? The rapture. So there you have the end time events, the rapture, tribulation, return, and kingdom. Now, before the rapture, let's go all the way to the left. The scriptures teach that there had to be the return of the Jews. There had to be the beginning of the times of the Jews. Right before the rapture, the world will be saying we have peace and security. And then on the day of the rapture, there will be a covenant that goes into effect. These are the four prophecies that we should watch for. Need to be awake. People even, before these prophecies, they should have been awake and watching. But we are living in the generation that is seeing these prophecies begin to be fulfilled. So of all people, we should be watching. So what I want to do, that's just an overview. Now I want to look at where did these come from, because you see from the left there are four prophecies. Return of the Jews, times of the Jews, peace and security, and a covenant with Israel. So on the front of the card, these are the four prophecies. Prophecies that must be fulfilled before the rapture. The first one is Ezekiel 37:12. Thus says the Lord God, behold, all my people, I will bring you into the land of Israel. In the context, that's after the Jews had been dispersed out of the land. God prophesied, I'm going to bring you back into the land. That prophecy was fulfilled in the 20th century. What happened?
They started slowly filtering in around 1900, but then there was a big influx after World War II.
Yeah, Holocaust, right. After World War II, before World War II, they came in by the tens of thousands. After World War II, they came in by the millions. How many Jews are in Israel today?
7.
Yeah, about 7 million. Right. Very dramatic. 1900, there were about 25,000 Jews in the land. There was no state of Israel, but there were about the size of Marshall, population of Marshall Jews in the land. But very dramatically, God fulfilled this prophecy in the 20th century. Okay, comments or questions about that prophecy? All right, in Luke 21:24, Jesus prophesied that Jerusalem will be trampled by Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. When was the beginning of Jerusalem being trampled by Gentiles? 70 AD. Jerusalem was under Jewish sovereignty before 70 AD, but 70 AD was a turning point. Jerusalem from 70 AD on was under Gentile sovereignty. Is that true today?
No.
No. Who is sovereign over Jerusalem today?
Jews.
Yeah, the Jews. Yeah. The nation of Israel is sovereign over the city of Jerusalem. When did that, when was the turning point? Yeah, June of 1967. Very dramatic fulfillment of Jesus' prophecy. What happened?
6-Day War.
Yeah, the 6-Day War that Israel should not have won because they were so outnumbered by the surrounding Arab states that were ready to invade them. And in a defensive war, they ended up in control of Jerusalem. They didn't set out to control Jerusalem, just in pushing back against Jordan and the armies that were pushing in on them, they moved against those armies and ended up with the city of Jerusalem. So it's quite a dramatic event. But that prophecy was fulfilled in 1967. So if the times of the Gentiles ended, well, first of all, what's the definition? What defines the times of the Gentiles based on that verse?
Control of Jerusalem.
Control of Jerusalem. Who's in control of Jerusalem? The Gentiles? Okay, it's the times of the Gentiles. So if the times of the Gentiles ended in 67, what times are we in? Yeah, you only have one option. If you're not in the times of the Gentiles, the only thing left is times of the Jews. So we've been living in the times of the Jews since 1967. Very dramatic fulfillment of prophecy. Phil?
Bob, we use the generic term Jews. There are conservative Jews and liberal Jews, and they have very strong and different views. And recently, I think this past week, Netanyahu, who's considered a conservative Jew, is back in power, if I remember correctly. Before that, it was definitely a liberal wing. And does prophecy address this at all?
Not directly.
That's fair watching.
But one of the reasons I wanted to talk about prophecy right now is because of the election of Netanyahu, because I think it's very significant. But prophecy doesn't speak directly to it, but I do want to comment on it later. You've raised an interesting topic, very much so. Okay. All right? So in 1967, that prophecy was fulfilled. Okay, one more prophecy has to be fulfilled before the rapture, and that's 1 Thessalonians 5:3. When they say peace and security, then sudden destruction comes upon them. I think you've got your Bibles open to 1 Thessalonians 5. So let's read the context of this. We can start in verse 1 again. Concerning the times and the seasons, brethren, you have no need that I should write to you. So let's just stop there. What would that mean concerning the times and seasons? They knew what the times and seasons were. What do you think they knew? What do you think the Thessalonians knew based on that verse?
What should happen in the future?
Yeah. I think they knew the timeline on the back of the card. At least the right-hand side of it. They knew about the rapture, the tribulation, second coming, and the kingdom. Those are the times, and those are the basics on the times and seasons. All right? The reason I think that is because of what he says previously about the rapture. All right, verse 2. You yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord so comes as a thief in the night. What's that a reference to? The day of the Lord.
Return of Christ.
The rapture and what else?
Beginning of the tribulation.
The beginning of the tribulation, because technically the day of the Lord is a term for the end time events, but the beginning of the end time events begins suddenly like a thief in the night. What would thief in the night? What would that metaphor mean?
You don't know when it's coming.
Yeah, you don't know when the thief comes.
He's not going to tell you.
Not going to announce it. Catches you off guard.
Well, not only are we not going to know when he comes, but the thief of the night will come quickly.
Quickly, yeah. Quickly and unexpectedly. Verse 3. For when they say peace and safety, the word safety could be translated security. Then sudden destruction comes upon them as labor pains upon a pregnant woman, and they shall not escape. So what's the sudden destruction? What's he referring to?
Tribulation.
Yeah, the tribulation. And specifically, the tribulation is going to begin with a war. It's going to be a big war. But it's the beginning of the time of tribulation, the time of destruction. And who's going to say peace and security? By the way, it's the same people upon whom the sudden destruction comes, right? When they say peace and safety, then sudden destruction comes upon them. So you've got they and them. Yeah, the world.
Peace.
Yeah. The world's going to say, we have peace and security, and then sudden destruction of the tribulation comes upon the world. And they shall not escape what? Yeah, the tribulation. The whole world's going to experience the tribulation. Verse 4. But you, brethren, are not in darkness, so that this day should overtake you as a thief. Now that verse bears some thought. What's he saying there?
That you're aware of what's going to happen, or what's to take place.
You are aware?
Should be.
Should be. I think it's in there. Let's see. You are not in darkness, that this day should overtake. Will there be Christians who are caught off guard?
Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep. So what's he saying to the Thessalonians?
Don't be like the people that are paying attention.
Yeah. Should they be caught off guard? Why not?
They should be awake
They
and
know
watching.
that, they know that they are the event.
That's in the Bible.
Yeah,
They got the card.
they've got the card. Look, it started in verse 1. Concerning the times and seasons, brethren, you have no need that I should write to you. The Thessalonians were well taught on these things. All knew that they were well taught. And that they weren't like the world, and they weren't like many Christians in that they had been taught. And when the rapture comes, they should not be caught off guard.
Until they're dead, every one of them,
Dead,
every one of them.
they are now, yeah.
It's a strange thing, to sit on them to watch. That's 2,000 years ago.
Yeah,
It's motivation.
that was their motivation.
But it didn't happen.
Not for them, it didn't. No.
But they didn't know that it could.
That's where the motivation.
Throughout all the generations, every generation had the same calling because this stuff could have started happening. God could have enacted all of it. And that's what we're trying to learn about. We should be looking at this because we're actually seeing that these people could have happened.
Yeah.
We're saying in verse 4 is saying that they won't be surprised, or that they won't be subject to the tribulation.
Well, what believers will, that are alive at the rapture will be in the tribulation? None. Okay.
Yeah, so we definitely know that we're not going to be in the tribulation. But verse 5 makes me think that he's saying, well, can we read verse 5?
Yeah.
Go ahead. You can
We're
read.
all sons of light and sons of the day. We are not of the night nor of the darkness.
Is that saying, is he basically saying we're believers?
Yes.
So it seems like it follows from verse 4. You brothers and sisters, I don't know what Noel's version says, mine's a little different. It seems to me like he could just be saying, yeah, you're not going to be in the tribulation.
But as long as the rapture, every Christian, every believer on the planet go away. So at the time of the day of the tribulation, there'll be no Christians alive that have been Christians longer than 7 years.
Sure. I guess that's what let me try to say it in a different way. Verse 5 seems to be his reason for saying what he says in verse 4. In verse 5, the reason is we're believers. So if we're saying in verse 4 that they're not going to be surprised, then he'd be saying, you're not going to be surprised because you're believers.
Well,
That's not what he's saying.
we can't ignore verse 1 either. That these are believers that knew. They've been taught. So believers that haven't been taught, even though they're not in the darkness in terms of their salvation, they're going to be caught off guard. They weren't thinking. They weren't watching.
Yeah.
6 and 7 is an encouragement not to stay awake.
Yes.
It would be the same for us.
Right.
4 leaves it open that the fact that some will not be aware. He says, so that this day should, he's saying, look, it could, but since you know it should not, well, he's leaving it open that some will.
Right.
The way I read verse 4.
Right. You know, most of you guys have had background on this. You fit verse 1. You have no need that we go over the times and the seasons. You already know it. So if the rapture should occur this week, could you say to the Lord, I had no idea this was coming? There's not one of you in the room that could say that, and the Lord say, oh, I understand. You won't say that because you have been taught, you know that the rapture could come. And you've been given multiple reasons to believe that.
We pray for that.
We pray for that. And we just looked at the prophecies that have been fulfilled. We live in a generation. Well, let me put it this way. This generation, more than any other generation, should be without excuse when it comes to being caught off guard.
In this country.
Huh?
In this country.
Well,
Or
why do you
one
say
nation
that?
under God. That's our motto.
Well, in terms of knowing these prophecies, the two prophecies have been fulfilled. The return of the Jews and the times of the Jews. Those prophecies have been fulfilled. And this generation has lived to see the fulfillment. You know, everybody that lived before 1900 or before 1967, Christians, they didn't see these things. They didn't see these prophecies fulfilled, but we have. So what I'm saying is, we of all generations in history, should be more awake, more alert than any generation, if we've been taught. If we've been taught. Does that make sense?
We have it now.
Yeah.
So the rapture can't happen today? Because they're not seeing people saying peace and security?
Yes. Yes, I would say it could happen today if all of a sudden there was a news announcement that the whole world...
I heard world leaders over the past year use that phrase.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, since 9/11.
A lot.
Since 9/11, the world's been saying we need peace and security.
Yeah.
We need peace and security. It's not that the world says we want it. This passage isn't saying, in my opinion, that we want it. The world thinks we have it because they're surprised by the sudden destruction that comes. So that means the world says, finally, we've got peace and security in our world. It's short-lived. It will be short-lived. So, Terry, in that sense, it could happen today if there was a sudden, declaration that the world believed.
Well, it can't happen this hour.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Putin pulls out of Ukraine in 10 or 20 minutes. Peace and security.
Yeah. It'll be a peace and security that isn't going to last.
No.
But it'll be a feeling.
Well, it's got to be a 10-nation accord.
Well, the other thing that's got to kind of line up is more so than like the Ukraine or Russia being involved or somebody, it's got to centralize on Israel. I mean, this focus, it's not somebody mitigates their war here or there that are in a faction. That's not relevant. What we're talking about is Israel.
Yes, thank you. It has to focus on Israel. It'll affect the world, but it has to focus on Israel. Why would I say that?
For the Jews.
Yeah, what times are we living in?
Jews.
We're in the times of the Jews. The two main prophecies were about the Jews, the return of Jews to Israel and the control of Jerusalem. So everything, God's focus is on Israel. God's focus is on the Jews. So Wes's point is very important. This peace and security, even though it's the feeling of the world, the center of this cry, peace and security, will focus on Israel.
So when you say focus, is it like the world will be proclaiming a state of peace and security about Israel?
Yes.
And there could be wars happening in other places?
Possibly.
Okay.
However, the destruction comes upon the whole world,
Yeah.
which, part of me says I don't know, and part of me says I think so. Part of me says I don't know if there'll be peace worldwide, but the other part of me says I think so. But I know that the peace and security has to focus on Israel.
Because that's the nuts and bolts. If we're supposed to be watchful, that's what we need to know. So watchful.
Well, the Abraham Accords were very interesting for sure, because that's the right region and the right people. Of course, it got put on the back burner after Jared Kushner and Trump got defeated, but it was headed in the right direction anyway.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that. It'll be next week. But the Abraham Accords were an amazing step toward, possibly toward the fulfillment of this prophecy. Now, God could work in other ways, but it just seems to me that the Abraham Accords were a huge step toward this goal, this focus on peace and security, especially related to Israel. Mike.
Bob, us going through this, it just keeps coming into my head. I need to get my house in order. We need to get our house in order. He's saying here, once the trumpet sounds, you got no more time to tell your children, your grandchildren, your cousins, you know, there ain't gonna be no hold on till I can finish up my work here. So it's just blasting through my head that we need to get our house, make sure our house is in order, our lamps are trimmed.
You know, you're saying what I think God's saying, every one of us. What you just said right there is, more than any other generation, we should be awake and watching. Because we've seen things that no other generation has seen for, you know, the last 1900 plus years. We've lived to see it. We're living in the time, we're living in the last days. We're living in the times of the Jews.
The closest it's ever been.
Yeah. And Mike's right. So this is why I think it's good. It's important for us to keep reminding us, letting God remind us to stay awake and watch. Okay.
Should I be watching for Ezekiel 38?
No. That's a whole other subject. What is Ezekiel 38 about? The Russian.
The Confederates from the
The
north.
Ezekiel war happens at the end of the
Yeah.
at the end of the 1,000-year reign. It doesn't happen in our lifetime or before this.
Yeah. Some, yes, yeah. That's the whole. I'll answer it briefly. I don't think that the Ezekiel 38 happens before the tribulation.
Do you think it's possible to miss the peace and security proclamation? I mean, I listen to the news, right? We're all aware of what's happening in the world to some extent, but are there certain outlets that we should be following that may be more likely to reveal some of these things?
Outlets?
News outlets. Where do we get we all get our information from somewhere. So
It's gonna be worldwide. We're not gonna have trouble
So,
picking up on
Nations
it.
aligned to make this happen.
They all say the same
All
thing.
the
anyways.
major networks,
They say the
including
same
Fox, they're gonna cover it.
Well,
yeah, but what if the 10-nation treaty happens behind closed doors, and then the second they announce it, then that?
well, we're not on that yet.
Well, you guys brought it up, so.
We'll get to the 10 nations covenant next week. But in verse 3, when they say peace and security, then destruction comes upon them. Okay, the destruction is the tribulation. Who's the tribulation coming upon?
The world.
The whole world.
Yeah.
So them is the same as they. They say peace and security. So peace and security will be a worldwide, the whole world will say we have peace and security because the tribulation is coming upon the whole world. Okay? So it's not going to be, the peace and security won't be a secret thing. That's the whole point. It'll be known. And that's what's going to catch the world off guard is, hey, we've got peace and security, and all of a sudden, tribulation. It's going to catch them off guard.
And a lot of people gone.
That and the rapture, because I believe that the rapture and the beginning of tribulation are on the same day.
Yeah.
They have to,
And
which,
you can see why. All of a sudden, all the Christians are gone. I mean, the world's gonna be in chaos. But we're gonna be like, oh.
all right, well, I didn't think we'd finish today, and I didn't really expect that we would, but we got a good start. Let's pray.